safety violation, major inconvenience.
They had like peeling paint.
When we first moved in, the old tenant was still living there.
And we didn't have hot water for about 4 weeks, and it was freezing cold.
The problem with the bathtub, every time you take a bath, it would leak downstairs.
It smelled, everything was filthy, the vanity in the bathroom was cracked in half.
When it was at its worst, she basically couldn't live in her bedroom.
Of course they didn't come. The maintenance people, they didn't really come.
We were really upset, and no one was helping us, and we kind of felt like, well, this isn't right. Right? It shouldn't be that way.
Nobody expects to have problems when they rent an apartment. An apartment that looks great when you tour it can have lots of issues hidden underneath that clean, shiny surface. When trouble strikes, who's going to help you?
The tenant union provides help for students to find housing, and if a student is having problems with their landlord, they can come here and talk to us, and we'll try to help them resolve the problem.
It's great that the tenant union can help when you have problems with your apartment or landlord, but there has to be some way to anticipate problems in the first place.
The landlord complaint records are helpful for students because it shows which landlords don't take care of problems like mold, roaches, leaks in roofs. And it also tells tenants which landlords do take care of those problems. And the actual complaint itself is if a tenant is having a problem with their landlord, then they can talk to us, and if it's appropriate, they can file a complaint. It's very important for students to check the complaint records because once you sign a lease, you can't get out of it. So that's why it's really important for students to check the complaint histories at the tenant union.
If I had seen them, I would have been a little concerned. I believe he had 8 over the previous 5 years, and now there's at least one more complaint from us added to that binder, which I hope other people will take to heart.
We actually had not. Obviously it's something you're supposed to do, but it was also something that we kind of relied on one person to do, which she said she did. And overall, I would suggest in the future that if you're renting anywhere, even if it's with more people, always make sure that you yourself check the complaint record.
When our landlord gave us the paper asking us if we were resigning, all 3 of us looked at each other and sort of laughed because of the experiences we had. I'm going to be living in Urbana again next year with a great landlord. I checked out her record with the tenant union and I got great reviews.
The tenant union will help you when you have a problem with your apartment. But why not avoid problems to begin with? There are so many things you can do before you sign a lease that will help you make sure your apartment is a good place to live.
The first thing that we would recommend before you sign a lease with other potential roommates, make sure your roommate situation is absolutely solid. If you or your roommate do not come back to school, you're stuck with the lease. The student needs to make sure that you trust them to pay the rent because you're all liable for the rent if it doesn't get paid.
Our landlord showed them an apartment that wasn't our apartment. That wasn't the one they were signing for, which is a big no-no.
Make sure you see the exact apartment that you're signing a lease for.
So before I actually signed the lease, I said I want to go see our apartment.
We highly recommend coming to the tenant union, checking the complaint histories, going over a lease, and to do that before the tenant has their heart set on a place, because we've seen instances of tenants come here, they love this place, but then they check the landlord complaint records and it's not so great, and they still want the place. And so it's important to check the complaint histories and go over the lease before you fall in love with the place.
What are landlord complaint records, and why are they so important?
I learned that actually, I believe this is correct, that landlord has the most complaint records, especially with the number of apartments that landlord has.
Some of the biggest companies don't have any complaints at all. And some of the biggest companies just might have 1 or 2 complaints. But there's others that have dozens of complaints. And so it's not about size. The difference between landlords that have lots of complaints and landlords that don't have many complaints is how does the landlord respond when you have a maintenance request?
And if I would have known that beforehand, I probably wouldn't have chosen to live with that landlord.
So you make sure you trust your roommates and that you have seen the exact apartment you want to rent. Then you check the complaint records for your landlord. You hope that the landlord doesn't have many complaints and acts quickly to resolve problems. If everything is good so far, what else do you need to do before signing a lease?
It's important for students to have their lease reviewed at the tenant union. Once you sign the lease, you can't get out of it. It doesn't matter if you have a roach infestation, it doesn't matter if you have mold, it doesn't matter if the place is trashed when you moved in. You've signed it, there's no grace period for changing your mind. So you need to know what's in your lease to know what your rights are. Students need to know what's in the lease for other reasons as well. If an agent says that utilities are included in the rent, but the lease says the tenant's responsible for utilities, you need to know that because what it says in the lease is what matters. If the lease says the landlord can give you a notice and you have to move out of your unit into another unit, if you don't know that that's in your lease, you may not know that that's what you're agreeing to.
Now you've got the roommate situation under control. You've checked the landlord complaints and had the tenant union review your lease.
It's important to document everything that is not 100% perfect with your apartment when you move in, because if you are unable to prove what the apartment looked like when you move in, you could be charged hundreds of dollars for bogus charges of cleaning, stains, whatever. For instance, if there's a huge stain in the carpet when a tenant first moves in, it's important to write that on the move-in condition report, because if you don't, the landlord at the end of your lease could say that you did that and then charge you for carpet replacement. So it's very important to document that on a move-in condition report when you first move in. With the move-in condition report form, it's very important to keep the original copy of it and give a photocopy to the landlord. A student would not want to just give the only copy to the landlord because they could misplace it and then you don't have any proof of what it looked like when you first moved in. So that's very important. And it's a good idea to come to the tenant union to get it notarized before you give the landlord a photocopy of it. That way it just shows the date of when you actually filled out the move-in condition report. Keep the original copy of it and put it in a place that you'll be able to remember where it is at the end of the lease term.
Let's review. Before you even sign a lease, make sure that your roommates are cool and will be just as responsible as you for paying the rent. Be sure you've seen the exact apartment you'll be renting. Then check out the landlord's complaint record at the tenant union and have them review your lease so that you know exactly what you're agreeing to. Remember, a lease is a legal contract and you can't break it. Then, when it's move-in day, make sure you document every little thing that's not right with the apartment. Write it on the move-in condition report, keep the original, and give a copy to the landlord. For extra protection, have the tenant union notarize both copies to prove the date it was completed. Your lease is over, and it's time to move out. You want to make sure you don't get stuck paying for dirt and damages that you didn't make. That move-in condition report you held onto will help you avoid responsibility for damages that were there before you. But you also need to prove that you left the place spick and span.
Without photographs showing how you left the place when you move out at the end of your lease term, a landlord could come up with any kind of charges and say that you didn't clean the place or there was all these damages. That's why it's so important to take photographs. And if you don't pay, if they send you a bill and you don't have proof and you don't pay, they could turn you over to collections, they could sue you, or both. So it's so important to have the proof of how you left the place at the end of the lease. This student was charged by the landlord for having a dirty sink. This person was charged for needing their oven to be cleaned. This person was charged for a dirty sink, dirty toilet and bathroom, a dirty microwave, another dirty floor, dirty refrigerator, and a dirty bathtub. And this is why it's important to have the proof, have the pictures to go back to the landlord and show the clean sink. This is a sparkling clean sink that anybody can tell. And taking this picture to the landlord was how this student got their money back. And this is why it's important to take pictures at the end of your lease.
When you take your move-out photos, use a disposable film camera because you want real prints of your pictures. When you take photos, getting good and close to show how clean everything is. Protecting yourself when you rent an apartment is simple. There are just a few things you need to do that will save you tons of time, effort, and money. Before you rent an apartment and sign a lease, make sure you have good roommates who are responsible. Check out the landlord's complaint record at the tenant union. Then have the tenant union staff review your lease. On move-in day, make sure to write down every single problem on the move-in condition report. Keep the original for yourself and give a photocopy to the landlord. For extra protection, the tenant union will notarize both copies to prove you filled it out when you moved in. When it's time to move out, take pictures of the apartment, especially the kitchen and bathroom. You want to prove that you left everything clean. Use a disposable film camera and make sure you get prints. By doing these simple things, you'll help yourself avoid a lot of potential headaches. But if you do have a problem with an apartment or landlord, the tenant union is there to help.
Like, it sounded like a really good place to go because, I mean, tenant union, you are going to be a tenant, so why not have somebody help you with just kind of all the different issues and something you've never gotten yourself involved in before, or like to sign a lease.
They really were an advocate for us, someone that could speak for us, someone who had, a little bit more authority probably with the landlord.
And the fact that it comes out of your student fees, so you don't have to pay extra for someone to help you.